Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about how to choose the material that you're going to work with, or choosing stock, in the context of blacksmithing, of course. So with that, let's just get into it. So the first thing you got to think about is what material you want. What are the properties of the material that you want? You have a few options and you have a few criteria that you got to work with. So sometimes you want something that's magnetic or something that's not magnetic. And depending on what you want there, you can go for different kinds of material. You got iron, which is magnetic, and you got, say, aluminum, which isn't. But you also got to think about what sparks, what doesn't. Iron sparks, but also samarium, tungsten, titanium, stuff like that. Those also spark, but a few of those aren't magnetic. So those are some of those things. And there are also non-sparking metals out there like aluminum and copper, for instance. Although, to my knowledge, I don't know if there are any magnetic metals out there that don't spark. You also got to look at color. Sometimes you have aesthetic uses for the material that you're working with. You want to make something look nice. So, for instance, this bronze ring. I couldn't make a yellow ring out of iron. I mean, I could, but it'd be really weird. So, generally speaking, you kind of want to take color into account whenever you're working with material. You're also going to want to think about strength, and this is definitely true from an architectural perspective. You probably wouldn't want to make a skyscraper out of aluminum, because aluminum is really weak, and it's probably not going to hold up the weight of that whole thing. So you're going to want something a little bit sturdier like iron. And same for like a sword or something like that. Are you going to make a sword out of bismuth? Because bismuth is super brittle. You're going to make it out of aluminum. I mean, aluminum bends at, the drop of a hat. I mean, I once made a saber out of aluminum, and that thing, as soon as I would hit anything with it, would curve off at a 90-degree angle. All this to say that strength is an important factor whenever you're choosing the material you need to work with. You're also going to want to look at resistance to corrosion or tarnish, as well as the reactivity of whatever you're working with. For instance, there's a reason why I haven't been working with something like sodium, because, well, attempting to water quench sodium is a really bad idea unless you want an explosion on your hands. What use would there be in making, say, like a ring out of that stuff? Because the ring's just going to tarnish, and it'll probably react with your skin, and you won't have a very good day. This is also true for iron, bronze, and stuff like that, just on a smaller scale. You have rust you gotta worry about. This actually does leave a green ring on my finger, despite the fact that it's actually pretty resistant to tarnish. I mean, on the outside anyway. On the inside, you got that patina forming, which isn't particularly great, but, I mean, what can you do? It's bronze. But the aluminum ring that I made, the reverse bronze ring that I made, still has not tarnished at all. It doesn't leave any sort of ring on my finger, so that's a good material as far as I'm concerned for like ring making and such. It doesn't seem to be too soft or too brittle or anything like that either, so I think I may have actually found a good gray ring material. So who knows, I might make some more reverse bronze rings. Also, you got to worry about ductility, and I've already kind of covered this. It's markedly different from strength. Strength and ductility are both very important properties in steel. Part of what makes steel optimal for blacksmithing and what makes blacksmithing really a thing. You're able to move the metal around and it all stays together. Iron, optimally, if you're going to do blacksmithing, you're going to want to do some sort of iron or steel sort of work, because once you start getting into other metals, it starts getting a little bit weirder to work with, a little bit hazier. So definitely, especially if you're a beginner, stick to the iron on that one, stick to the steel on that one. Also, you're going to want to take into account spring factor. Now, this is very important in bladesmithing, because in bladesmithing, you're trying to hold an edge. You want your material to be a nice hard material. You want your steel that you're working with to be a nice hard steel, or at least a steel that can be hardened. The thing is, you don't want it to be like, say bismuth, where it's like, oh yeah, okay, hit it once and it just shatters. Because some hard steels are like that. You'll hit it and it'll break apart, or it'll start forming cracks, and it just gets weaker and weaker and it shatters, essentially. You don't want a hard but brittle metal. You want a hard, springy metal. And you don't want one that's just going to bend, for instance, the aluminum. It all stayed together, but it just bent all the time. The saber just always just... Now I'm making a saber out of steel, which has a much better, I guess, spring factor. I don't know what the correct term for it is, but I just call it spring factor. The ability for it to go like that and just spring straight back to the shape that you forged it into. But, you know, there are some applications where spring factor isn't so much of an issue. For instance, I don't expect this to be anything, you know, springy or anything, so I think I'm pretty fine with this. The other major thing you gotta consider, other than just your material, is what it's shaped like. So, for instance, I wouldn't want to try to make this out of this hulking mass of bronze. I want to start with something that's relatively close to this shape. So, iron and steel sort of stuff, you're going to want to take into account a few things. So, if you're going to be blacksmithing something, if you're going to be hammering on it, you're going to want to think about the thickness of the material you're working with. If you're going to make a knife out of a straight up ingot, like a big old hunk of iron, it's going to take forever to heat up. And it's also going to be really, really difficult to hammer. So you're going to want to start off with something that's relatively close to what you plan on producing. So some sort of bar stock is better than a straight up ingot, better than a straight up lump. You're probably not going to want to work with sheet metal because sheet metal is generally much softer. It doesn't tend to have that springiness to it. But you're going to want to work with some sort of bar stock so you can hammer it out into the shape that you need. With the sheet metal, it's probably going to be too thin anyway. So bar stock, hammer that down, perfectly valid. Because the heat will get through it a whole lot quicker than, say, just a lump of iron. So that's definitely one of the things you gotta consider. Another thing you gotta consider is when it starts getting to about the shape that you need it to be, that you can't be hammering it too thin. Because if you hammer it too thin, once you're done sanding, you're gonna come out with something that's absolutely flimsy and not what you wanted. So you want to make sure that you don't hammer it too thin while you're doing this. So you want to make sure that it's a good thickness. You want a nice moderation when it comes to the thickness of the material you're working with. And also just sort of the shape of it. You know, I wouldn't want to make, for instance, a knife out of a straight up cube, because that would be really difficult to get to and it would just waste a lot of time. For the stuff that is easier to cast, yeah, you can pretty much just make your own shape, and it'd probably just be a better idea to cast it to as close as you have to something. I mean, the less hammering you do on soft metals, probably the better, because soft metals tend to work harden really easily and get really brittle. At least all the ones I've worked with have. So you don't want those cracks to be forming, especially if you're not very good at metallurgy like me, and you probably end up with aluminum in the grain boundaries all the time. So you're gonna want to cast something pretty close to the end result, and when you do, just make sure that your mold can take it. Just make sure that it's made correctly, that it'll all hold together, that it won't, you know, fall apart whenever you're making whatever you're making. I mean, I have a whole video on that, so I don't feel like I need to cover this one at length. So yeah, I mean, if you want to see more about casting, I have a video. It's up in one of these corners. I'm not sure. You'll see it. Anyway, yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about choosing your material, choosing your stock, what you're going to work with. It is important to take a look at what you've got as it compares to what you want. That way you don't waste a bunch of time on something that you could have done simpler with something else that you have. It's better not to waste time, so it's good to find the material you want to work with quickly and to be able to discern what you want from it and what you have. So with that, thank you guys for joining me for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe, and do leave a comment below. I could use some suggestions for future videos. So with that, thank you for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.